you're not seeing the whole keyboard or the whole guitar fretboard or whatever as one big system. You start chopping it up into smaller things, and then you're not able to move fluidly through them.
Welcome to the channel, or thank you very much for returning if you've been here before. I'm Dan Weiss, creator and owner of MFile Music Theory and Songwriting. We are all about helping you gain control of your creative passion and power so you can become the musician you are supposed to be, making the most impact with your music by creating the music that you hear in your head. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on that little bell notification so you don't miss my super amazing, ultimate, life-changing content when it comes out. Now, let's get to the video.
We are going to talk about modes. This is something that, again, we hear a lot about. Not everybody is clear on what exactly they are. What do you mean by modes? What are they? What do we do with them? Let's try and answer a couple of those questions today. Now I'm going to start with a hypothetical. Imagine yourself waking up early morning, you leave the house, and a majestic bald eagle soars down in front of you, drops a $20 bill. Shit, that's okay, cool. $20 for free. You bend to pick it up, and the local Billy, who's a real badass, he runs up from behind you, kicks you in the ass. You fall and you break your glasses. Oh no. How will anyone identify me as the nerd that I am? No, I can't see. Ah. Right in front of you, as you're picking up the broken shards of your spectacles, you see there's a pouch of real diamonds and a note pinned to the bag that says, "Call Gary to sell them, no questions asked." Not only are you involved in illicit organized crime, but your mood can vary from 1 minute to the next. And this is also true with the major scale. The major scale. But how can this be? It's only one scale. And that's where you're wrong, my eager pupil. Because the major scale provides us with 7 different possibilities. And these are known as the modes. So let's dive in. The modes of the major scale. So here's our trusty keyboard. And here's our major scale in the key of C. All the notes are there. And as we always try and remember and establish, the key of C is C to C on the keyboard, all white keys. Now this is a really good visual of the actual pattern or formula, I guess, for the major scale. Since it's all white keys, you can see that we skip over a note on the black key, so that's a whole step or a whole tone. Get it again, but there's no black key between E and F. So that is a half step or a semitone or 1 fret on the guitar. So then we have another skip, boop, and another one again. And then there's no black key between B and C, so that's where the semitone is. So this set pattern, if you take the pattern and move it to any different key on the keyboard, but you play that same pattern, you will still be playing the major scale, just in a different key. So it's tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. That is the strict scale formula. We've got a major scale. So now if we were to wipe that off and talk about, okay, well, what if we were to play the C major scale, but just start on D instead? So we would have a slightly different pattern, but it's still all the white notes on the keyboard there. Just going D to D. And the semitones are in different spots. See, we've got C, and then we've got this new weird thing, D. So this is the concept of a mode. You have the same scale, the same key, but you're starting on different notes, creating a different pattern. So let's talk about these modes. The first mode, based on whatever the major scale you are using is, that is Ionian. Very familiar pattern. The next one is Dorian. And again, as we move through these, watch where those yellow markers are for the semitones. They're constantly shifting and cycling through, just like the notes are. So, C major scale starting on the third note, E, is Phrygian. We've got that very distinct half step going from the first and second note. That's a really big tell about this scale. It gives it a very, almost like a flamenco style, Spanish style music, guitar kind of. You recognize that sound for sure. Lydian. This is an interesting one because it's a major scale with a sharp 4 note, which makes it sound really interesting and bright. You'll recognize a lot of that in Danny Elfman's music. Any Tim Burton movie Danny Elfman has done. Danny Elfman also did the Simpsons theme. And it's got a very particular sound to it, and it's got a lot of really interesting uses out of it as well. Mixolydian, this is a fun one. It's very bluesy, very exciting, fun, and it's open too. Aeolian, you'll remember this guy. It's the natural minor scale, and it naturally occurs in the major scale as one of the modes. Oh, crazy! And finally, on the last scale degree, we have Locrian. It's very dark and weird sounding, but it still has its place as rounding out the last of the patterns of the modes. So let's clear off our keyboard here. Now, how do we go about using the modes? We know that the mode is like a scale, but it's more a rearranging of one scale. That's a really, really important difference that you need to keep. Okay? This is one scale. If you try and think of the modes as separate scales, you put up this mental block that you're learning a separate scale when you're not. You end up making 7 different scales that you have to learn out of one scale just being played in different positions. And you do yourself a disservice because that kind of chops it up. You're not seeing the whole keyboard or the whole guitar fretboard or whatever as one big system. You start chopping it up into smaller things, and then you're not able to move fluidly through them because your mind is just making these barriers between these things and thinking of them differently. So don't do that. That's very important. So when you play in one key, the chords of that key can be outlined by these various modes. So if we had a chord progression, let's say 1, 6, 2, 5. Pretty simple. But if you were to just play it all in C major, just kind of hope for the best, that'd be okay. You'd hit all the right notes. Like you wouldn't have wrong notes happening if you were just to noodle around in C major. But here's the thing. You can think about shifting C major depending on which chord in the key you're in. So let's look a little further at this. So if we're on the 1 chord, it's a C major 7 chord, and all these notes are the first mode, it's Ionian. So the green and red would be chord tones. Like green, you're safe. Red, you're hitting some juicy notes. And then the blue would be like passing tones. So while you're on the 1 chord, that's C major 7, go to town, play your heart's content, and these are the different degrees of hotness that you want to be able to bring out of the chord while you're there. So next chord is 6. That would be A minor 7. And same thing, we've got A to A, still in the key of C, but if you're shifting and playing C in a position where you're starting with A, now you're treating it as a new chord, technically using a different scale, but not. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very dangerous territory because it does seem like you're just shifting scales. But you really got to think about it as a scale in different positions. That will help to make your melodic lines go from chord to chord a lot more fluidly instead of just jumping, then jumping, then jumping again. You don't want to compartmentalize that. So on a 6 chord in the key of C, we've got A minor 7, and again, different degrees of hotness. You want to hit that C and G, that'll give the flavor. The A and the E, really just foundation of the chord, and then the blue notes B, D, and F are passing tones, getting between these various notes that outline the chord. Same thing on the 2 chord, D minor 7. You want to really milk that 3rd and 7th note, and then those passing notes give you a way to get from note to note. And finally, the 5 chord, doot. And again, a really important thing here is that that juicy note, that red B note there, happens to be a half step away from C. So we talk a lot about the building of tension and releasing on a chord, which happens a lot between a 5 chord, a dominant 7 chord, and a 1 chord. Because of that space, that red to blue, it wants to resolve to C. We set that key signature up. That note is playing with our ears' expectations and really creating that tension. So that's why it's a nice little chord progression, 1, 6, 2, 5. It's pretty simple. You jump around a little bit. You're in the same key, but the chords are far enough away from each other that it actually kind of might be a little more difficult to wrap your head around making a proper melody over these chords. So let's just look at these bad boys again. We got C major, A minor 7, D minor 7, and finally G7 or G dominant 7. So that's a little bit about what the modes are, how you get them, and what you can do with them. Now, it's not to say that you can't treat them like separate scales, but if you are learning about the modes, do not go crazy trying to treat them like 7 separate scales. This will be so much more work. I want you to really internalize the idea that it is 1 scale, 7 different patterns. If you know all the notes, if you know how things will jump around, that is when you can start exploring the idea of using them similarly to scales. But it won't set you back in a psychological understanding of how the music works. So please be careful. And that is the modes of the major scale. How nice.
If you want to learn more about any of the topics discussed on today's episode, or if you'd like to expand your horizons so you can make the most amount of impact with your music, please be sure to check us out at mfile.ca.